Most common misunderstanding is that a process is the same as a procedure.
Welcome to another episode of Talk with BPM Legends. Today we have Mr. Alec Sharp. Mr. Alec Sharp is a managing director of Artech. He is leading consultant, speaker, and instructor on business process change and data modeling. Alec is an author of Workflow Modeling, a top-selling book on process modeling, analysis, and redesign. The book is widely recommended, I would say, among consulting firms and as an MBA text. He is globally recognized as an expert in practical techniques for business process change, process modeling, analysis, data modeling, like some of us call it as a concept modeling too. Alec has developed a specific methodology in process management, which he has built and passed so many years after working with many small and large organizations, that explains how to discover a business process, how to define scope of boundaries, how to conduct initial assessment, or how to set the goal for the to-be process, or define your as-is model, analyze your current learnings, what are the aspects of selecting new processes. It's a great pleasure and honor for us to have Alec on board today for our episode on Talk with BPM Legends. Thank you so much, Alec, for giving your time. It's a great pleasure for us.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure for me. And when I saw the other people you have interviewed, including my good friend Roger Tregear, I was very happy to be included in this.
Thank you so much, Alec. So to start our session, Alec, with you, I have a few questions. These questions we as a practitioners have discussed a lot within the organizations. We have been asked these questions many times. So we would like to discuss these questions with the legends and understand their perspective about these questions. How do they feel, how they answer on this? To start with, the very first question is, what is business process management? And if you can give some brief about the methodology that you have built on process management.
Okay, well, I will start by saying that business process management is a challenge because especially at the most senior levels in the enterprises I work at around the world, there is very little awareness of what actually is a business process. I think we will talk about this more later, but the most common misunderstanding is that a process is the same as a procedure, and it is not. One end-to-end business process, like onboarding a new customer, launching a new product, filling an order, that could include hundreds of procedures. So our first challenge is helping people understand, well, there's really three things. Everybody understands the organizational structure of their company, the functions, the divisions, the departments, but not necessarily the end-to-end processes. And many people confuse process and procedure. So the heart of business process management is raising awareness, without lecturing, but nicely, gently helping people see the end-to-end processes that cut across many functional areas. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've delivered hundreds of workshops and hundreds of executive briefings. And if we, and nobody argues. People go, oh, of course. When you give them practical examples, they say, oh, of course. And all of our problems are at the interface between the departments. But we have, I think, honestly, there are too many people in the business process management field who want to lecture people. And they talk in foreign language and about business processes. But it's a very simple idea. So the heart of it is making it visible, helping people see what we actually mean by an end-to-end process, and then the need to manage them. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but I feel good.
No, surely. Alec, you have touched upon the procedure, and I would like to ask my second question related to this. When we talk about process documentation, right?
Yes.
This has been largely misunderstood as a procedure or a process
Yes.
document or
Yeah.
something else. And some of the time we have seen the process document is such a thick document that includes such a minor level information that it can play as a role of the requirement specification, process, procedures, work instructions, manual, everything into one document.
Right.
So how do you differentiate? How will you explain or guide that when you define a process, what is the scope of work should be documented?
Right. That I love this question because it demonstrates your awareness of the difference between process and procedure, which is a huge source of confusion. Especially, I do a lot of work in what I call the mission-driven fields, the fields that people are drawn to because it is a calling. It's not a way to make a lot of money. So higher education, healthcare, social services, criminal justice, and especially in those kinds of organizations, when people hear the word process, they think procedure. Now, procedure documentation is incredibly important. I have clients in the energy sector, so energy companies, oil and gas, pipelines, and to them, procedure is incredibly important because following procedure equals safety, which means no lost time due to accidents. So they're very focused on procedure, but those are the companies that are also they often have no idea what their end-to-end processes are. So when I go in, as I told you earlier, when I get brought in to do what I call project recovery, when a project is struggling, the first thing I have to do 100% of the time, and I mean that, not 80%, not 90%, 100% of the time, I have to pull people out of the details and build what I call a scope model. And the scope model says, here is the trigger at one end. The patient presents at the hospital. At the other end are the final results. They have been treated, medical charts are updated, perhaps the insurer has paid, and then in between, what are the 5 to 7 major phases or activities? And I'm sure you would find it very interesting, Amit, to see the reaction of people. Most people have never actually seen what their end-to-end processes are. And the beautiful thing is that seeing, here is our end-to-end process, and it involves all these different groups, that opens people up to the possibility of change. Because now we're talking about the what is the process and showing that it's different than the who and the how. Who are the organizations? How is the process supported with systems? So this can be again, circling back, documenting standard operating procedures or standard work instructions, whatever you want to call it, is vital. But so is showing the entire end-to-end process and where those procedures fit in. And maybe how they might be in conflict.
And you have worked a lot on the process modeling side, so another way of documenting process. But there are the different techniques of process modeling, UML, BPMN, EPC, and so on. Can you share your thoughts? What are these techniques, when it should be used? What is the right approach of using these techniques?
Yeah, well, this is this is a topic I have strong feelings on. First of all, what is the most common mistake that teams make when they are maybe given responsibility for improving a process? Well, the number one problem is they don't identify a true process. They identify that they will talk about the finance process, our customer service process, our logistics process. But those are not processes. Those are organizational structures. And then they will immediately go into too much detail. So in general, when I am doing process modeling, I have some very specific techniques that I developed in self-defense. When I started doing serious process work 30 years ago, I immediately went into swim lane diagramming. And as soon as you are doing swim lane diagramming, people start to tell you procedural level detail.
Yeah.
And then I also saw people were arguing, like, where does the process begin? Where does it end? Who should be here in the room with us? Are we talking a system? Are we talking a process? So eventually I built this very simple framework that I call a process scope model. And it shows what is the triggering event, as I said, what are the results, what are the major phases or activities, around 7, and what are the cases or variations. So it might be we're filling a new order, we're filling a recurring order. And like I said, I have to do this 100% of the time, and people are always surprised to see the whole end to end. So I do that, and then I will augment that with an additional level of detail. Here are the main steps within each phase, and only then do I get into swim lane diagramming or workflow modeling. And I have always been a bit of an iconoclast, I guess, a rebel. I am not a fan of BPMN at all. It's more suitable for technical, for implementation of automated workflows. The most useful work I do when I'm doing flow modeling in person, it's with Post-its, it's with stickies on rolls of paper on the wall, or now I might be using a tool like Lucidchart or Lucidchart or Miro, but very low tech, simply boxes and lines that show the overall sequence. And initially, I defined a level of detail I call the handoff diagram, where every box shows every step is somebody holding the work. And it doesn't matter if they do a lot of work, a little bit of work, or nothing at all. I just want to see the overall pattern of the process. And some of the most important, like almost revolutionary process improvements that I've been involved in have been based on this simple model. Because when you get into these very detailed BPMN diagrams, nobody can see the overall structure of the process, because that's not what they're for. They're for technical level implementation. So I do this initial flow model I call a handoff model, and then I take it down to what I call the service level model that shows the main accomplishments that an actor, what do they contribute to the process while they hold the work. And then I have a rule that as soon as you are about to describe how they carry out a task, then I stop swim lane diagramming. And that's when you want to have a procedure document, a checklist, a use case, a decision tree, because workflow models, I always like to say a workflow flow model is a great tool for showing the flow of work. They are terrible tools for showing the details. Other tools are much better. So sorry if I went on too long there. It's a topic I feel strongly about, and far too many people come out of university and they're taught to do this very detailed modeling, but you can't innovate. I had a great experience with a large European financial services organization. They were struggling with redesigning a process. So they asked me to come in and spend a few days with them. They heard I was going to be over there, and they had 17 beautifully drawn swim lane diagrams spread around this meeting room. They were perfect, but it was too detailed to see what are the actual issues. And when we pulled back to the high level, then they came up with a revolutionary process redesign.
So, Alec, defining the business process is one aspect. Execution is another one. And for the execution, organizations look for the digital strategy, digitization of the business processes. Do you see any role of business process management in digital journey of an organization?
Absolutely. And it's no different than what we have been seeing for many years. If something new comes along, digitalization, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but you still need to understand end to end who is doing what. What are we trying to achieve? So it's the same when I get a lot of business now from agile teams that have they are seriously into agile, but now agile is not enough. Now that it's being used at enterprise scale, you need to understand the end to end. I could go through 20 years of examples of silver bullets. They come along, rapid application development. I remember in the .com era, everybody thought, well, we'll just code HTML all the way to Nirvana. Well, it didn't work. And the .com bust was the best thing that ever happened to my business. The second best thing that ever happened to my business was the global financial crisis in 2008, because both demonstrated that there are no silver bullets, there are no magic answers. Ultimately, you need to understand how your organization actually works. Not how it's organized, but how it actually delivers results of value. And I see this happening. I'm very optimistic about the future of our field because I see people that they're starting to get it.
So, Alec, you talked about .com or the burst of the .com or the financial crisis happened.
Yeah.
The matter of fact is, organizations who were successful, they also had the process management in place. Organization who faced the challenge also had the process management to some extent in their organization, because that's what we call BPM is about managing business. So what are the challenges of related to process management in an organization that make it successful or a failure to an organization?
Well, boy, do you have an easier question? I think that where it is most successful, let's start with where it is unsuccessful, where people decide somehow they get permission or authorization, they start a business process management group, and they begin this very top-heavy approach. They want to model the entire company. They spend a lot of time selecting and implementing tools. They lecture people far too much, and people can't. And they use language that puts people off. Now, I should. True confessions here. We're talking about business process management. I don't call myself a business process management professional because around 10 years ago, I started doing something, I don't know why, but every time I started a new engagement or I went to a new client, I asked the people I was working with, what do you think when you hear the phrase business process or business process management? And I thought that I was going to hear terms like, oh, collaboration, seamless integration, end-to-end, results, transparency. I had this crazy optimistic idea that people had a positive viewpoint on business process. No. I remember one person said process, ew, the P word. And a lot of people remembered business process reengineering, BPR, from the early 90s. And when a lot of companies, BPR meant downsizing, outsourcing, and bad implementation of technology. And I was at one university where they said, okay, let's look at those three words. Business, we hate business. Process, process means more detailed overhead. And management, we hate management. So business process management is not necessarily a phrase that is going to make you friends. So what about the companies that are more successful? And one other thing, the companies that are, in my experience, least successful, they adopt some external methodology or approach. It might be TOGAF, it might be Lean, it might be Six Sigma, but they get almost religious about it and weird terminology like we have in Lean, and it just annoys people. The companies that I've seen are more successful take a more lightweight approach. They are more organic and opportunistic. They see a problem, they help solve it. Even if it isn't the entire end-to-end process, they see an opportunity to demonstrate success. And they take a little bit of Lean and they take a little bit of Six Sigma and maybe a little bit of business process reengineering or a little bit of my approach, which is very much about the soft factors. But they carve an approach that makes sense for their organization, for the skills and the culture in their organization. And they find opportunities, and then when they have a success, they promote them. They let other people know about, here's what we achieved. And they engage their clients in these promotions. And I'm thinking, did you interview Sandeep Johal?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, he's really good at, this idea of how can we offer ourselves as a service and not as a business process management service, just how to make your life better, how to improve your I often describe a process as how we get things done around here. So lightweight approaches, organic, opportunistic, iterative, adaptive, that I see that working. Top down, lecturing people, religious adherence to some external methodology, I don't see that working.
So as I'm understanding, it is more related to having a right mindset and the culture in the organization and belief on the methodology that you are selecting, whether it is a combination of the multiple system.
Oh my God, that you are so correct. I have seen cases where some consulting companies are guilty of this. They implement a new process in one environment, and I'm remembering an example where a consulting company implemented a new process in a high-tech company in the Route 128 area around Boston. So this was a young, dynamic company. Frontline people were very empowered. And then they took this process and they tried to implement it in the taxation authority at the state government in the largest state in America. And it was a complete failure because the culture and the skills just did not match. And this large state authority, they had serious skills. They had serious skills at high volume transaction processing, but this process had nothing to do with that. So you really have to get a feel for the culture of the organization. And boy, that is a lesson I've learned again and again. What works in one organization may be a dismal failure in another. In fact, in one of my workshops once, somebody said, there's no such thing as best practices. There are only practices that are best in a given situation. And culture, I say culture, core competence, and management style are the big things you have to consider.
Alec, so if it is linked to the culture and understanding about the organization, deep rooted into that, is the business process management applicable only for the large organization, or it is also applicable for small? Any
Yeah.
relationship size?
Yeah, I love this question. And again, I'll say I wouldn't call it business process management, but is being aware of your processes useful for small organizations? And my answer is absolutely. A lot of my clients, probably most of my clients, are global enterprises with 100,000 employees, 250,000 employees. So they're very big companies. But some of my most satisfying jobs have been with organizations with only 40 or 50 employees. Because when I had the opportunity once to speak at a retreat for entrepreneurs. This was part of an entrepreneurial MBA program that used my book as a text. And a question came up, and it became the heart of my presentation. When do we need to start worrying about our business processes? And my answer is around 40. When you have around 40 people, you better start looking at how they cooperate in getting things done. Because when there's only 20 people, everybody knows what everybody else does. But 40 people, now you better start looking at, okay, how do we actually launch a product or launch a new release of a product? How do we do that in a consistent way without bumping into each other? Now, some of my colleagues, I have colleagues who believe that 40 or 50 is a number. And Buckminster Fuller, who designed the geodesic dome and many things, he had this concept of a structure called a buckyball. And a buckyball had 42 nodes in it. And many companies use that as their model for organizational structure. As soon as you're getting above the size of a buckyball, you got to split and start again. Other colleagues of mine think it's more like 80 or 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
But none of the colleagues I respect think you need to be 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people to start thinking about your processes. Because I think when I was interviewed last week by Daniel Rayner, I think I suggested that if you're getting started, like there's three really good areas to start with: onboard an employee, develop a product. Well, developing a product, that's a little bit more organic. I would say onboard an employee, launch a product, and onboard a customer. And then, of course, fill an order. Do whatever the customer wants. Those are obvious places to start looking at how do we cooperate across all these functional areas.
In my last talk, I had a word with Mr. Andrew Spen, and
Yes.
Andrew
Yes,
talked about.
yeah, I love what Andrew says, which is that this is a team sport.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He also advised a lot in terms of integrating internal business processes with an outside view of your customer journey map.
Yeah.
So, Ellen, if I may request you to share one of your case study, one of your example, that how did you start a process management journey in an organization? What type of challenges you faced and how you resolved it?
Wow. Well, that's a tough one. I think first I should explain that many of my clients, many of my clients have actually said to me, "We're not sure what it is you do, but we know that things are better after." So I think, like, very often I'm brought in not so much as a process person, but there is a problem, a huge global, I'll just say an internet company had this problem. They couldn't pay their commissioned sales force, and so they just wanted me and a colleague to come in and help figure out what was wrong. Now, maybe I shouldn't have used that example, because in that case, the problem turned out to be data. But at the same company, like probably the world's most famous software company, but I won't name them, they had a problem in their internal software development. So they were developing software for other parts of the organization, in particular marketing. And the other parts of the organization were never happy with what they got, even though they had a pretty sophisticated mechanism for identifying features and prioritizing features. And so in a nice way, we showed them that they had no view of the end-to-end process. And I am convinced that you cannot identify in a reasonable period of time all of the key requirements for a piece of software unless you understand the end-to-end process. Here are the 7 major phases, and within each, here are the 5 to 10 major activities, and then for each activity, what do we need? So it's a very disciplined approach, but very fast as well. So in that case, we helped them see the need for process by solving a problem, which was that they were not satisfying their customer base because they didn't understand the end-to-end process. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think a big part of what I do is, let's call it gentle education. So I don't lecture people. I just try to show them something interesting. Maybe I'll tell a story about a famous company that spent tens of millions of dollars and got nothing for it, and it was because they were seeing the world this way. But oh, look what happened when they started to see the world this way. So that's a big part of it. We have to be, I think I'm going to write that phrase down, gentle educators, not lecturers, but gently show people the difference between functions and processes. My most favorite diagram is a very simple diagram that says, here is an end-to-end process, fulfill an order, and here's who it involves: sales, logistics, planning, manufacturing, customer service, and finance. They all play a vital role in it, but they are not separate. They are all linked by this end-to-end process. So a simple diagram that you can draw with nothing but boxes is often the one that where people, I've seen it so many times, people go, oh my God, of course. How did we miss that? Well, the answer is you missed it because you were diving into the details instead of seeing the big picture.
Alec, this gives me, for my second question, a thought on the second question. Is this business process management or a process management approach? Should it be a top-down or a bottom-up? And what is the role of senior management into this?
Okay, another topic I feel strongly about, like most things. I am an advocate of initially a bottom-up approach. In two ways. When I help a company discover what are their end-to-end processes, I usually do that bottom up. So I start with activities that people can recognize. And always, by the way, always in verb-noun pairs. You know, we register a customer, we issue an invoice. So no reference to who or how. So one of my sayings is what first, who and how next, only then why. So when I'm discovering processes, I start with these granular activities, and then I have a set of techniques. We link them into sequence, and we analyze the connections, and we discover where are the boundaries between processes. So we discover our processes in a bottom-up fashion and build the big picture, and then we proceed top-down, increasing rigor, granularity, and detail. So in terms of the mapping and modeling, I call it the arc of analysis. We start very granular, build up to the big picture, and then we carry on top down. Now that's discovering, mapping, analyzing processes. It's kind of the same for introducing process awareness. I have seen extremely few cases where business process management was driven by the C-level executives, the managing directors. Usually what we do is we see some sort of success at the mid-level. People realize, you know, somebody in purchasing is talking to somebody in logistics, and they realize there's just something not right here. And then we help, we put in place a process perspective, even if our scope of authority is less than the entire process. So the process may have 7 phases, but we are only allowed to look at 2. Well, okay, we'll do it. Because remember, I said opportunistic and organic. So we'll do what we can there. And then when people see a success, they tell their friends. It's like even before I got into process, when I was primarily a data management consultant, I would see this again and again. People would, they would bring me in to do some subject area concept modeling, and that would solve some communication problems, and then they would go and tell their colleagues, and their colleagues would come to us and say, hey, can you do some of that for us? And I've seen this again and again in the business process field. So my favorite example is my friend Joe Drayson at the University of Maryland, outside Washington, D.C. So he has this group that I help coach them, but they just took the ideas and ran with them, and they took local successes, and then people talked about it, and then the next thing you know, they're looking on a bigger scale, and now it has awareness at the president's office. If you tried to start there, you'd fail. So people, for huge transformational efforts, you do need that executive support, but you're not going to get it immediately. Everybody else has a different story that they're telling the executives. So I say start in the middle, get a success, promote it, share it, and work your way up. So I'm very much a bottom-up kind of guy.
When you start from bottom up, do you see any challenge of mapping organization vision and organization business objective with the processes that you're defining at the bottom?
Not especially, because this is why I say what first, who and how next, only then why. So I help a company figure out, here are your processes, and I have, I have a very clear and well-defined set of parameters or guidelines for here is what makes a true end-to-end process. So once you do that, then we say who is involved. Initially, who is involved organizationally, then who are the individual actors, and how is this process supported? And then, only then I ask, why is this important? Why do we need to study this process? And that's where we start to link it both to our, what I call MSGO, mission, strategy, goals, and objectives, and known issues and problems. So in fact, in previous years, I did a little bit of a more formal technique where we took processes and then we mapped them against critical success factors to see which process impacted the most critical success factors. But now I'm just a little bit more opportunistic. So if a company says we have a horrible problem with customer retention, then we'll just go in and say, okay, what processes and data have a role to play in customer retention? Is it our actual retention process? Is it our customer service process? Is it our service delivery process? Is it our customer onboarding process? But I'll try and figure out the what of the process and then establish that linkage. Not always. Sometimes it does start at the strategic level, but not that often.
Perfect. So, Alec, how do you measure the ROI of business process management?
I'm sorry, how do I
measure the ROI, return on investment, on business process management?
I don't. I am. Let me think here. Oh my God! I'm getting so old. It's getting frightening to think. Oh, I read this really great article, and then I'm thinking, wow, that was in like 1985. That was 35 years ago. But there was a consultancy called Nolan Norton, and one of them is very much about the balanced scorecard. So these are famous people. But they wrote a white paper in which they argued that the whole return on investment calculation was bogus. They said, if anybody
Mm-hmm.
can't go in and come up with 35% NPV, then they shouldn't be in this field. They made the point that everything that had spectacular return on investment was incalculable. You just couldn't calculate it. And I've seen this so many times. People try and calculate a return on investment, and that drags you down to the level of head count and hours and minutes. And to me, that completely misses the point. The most successful initiatives I've been part of have involved showing leadership, here are our end-to-end processes, and here is what people don't like about them. So part of my why question, I do what I call a case for action, where we look at each stakeholder and what do they like or dislike about the current process. And then the question is, do you care? Do you want to do something about this? And I can estimate costs, but I've given up on trying to estimate benefit. So I can tell a client, okay, looking at this, I can see that we can actually do something significant with 5 days of effort. A lot of my assignments are only between 2 and 5 days, because I have a very rigorous methodology. I'm a tough facilitator. I don't let people drift. I don't let people dive into the details or go off topic. I'm pretty, I probably seem like your friendly Canadian neighbor, but as a facilitator, I run a tight ship. And I often hear from clients, we don't know how you got that much out of us in only 3 days, but thank you. So I can estimate the cost of the analysis and design, and maybe even the cost of the implementation. But the benefit calculation, I think it's usually more of a strategic decision. If we make these changes, is it pulling us as an enterprise in the direction we need to go?
So, if the ROI is not the one thing that you measure in this, but you always take the buying of the C-level executives to start a process management approach in a structured manner in an organization.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
Okay, so the ROI is the one that you do not recommend to see at the first level, but you always have some best practices to engage, get buying from the C-level executives to have
Oh
a
yeah.
process management in the organization. So,
Oh
can you,
yeah, absolutely. I have there is an executive briefing that I have done. I've done it everywhere from Saudi Arabia to South Africa and Finland to the Philippines. I've done it all over the world, and it's usually 90 minutes, but sometimes even less. And the usual title is 5 things you need to know about business processes. And I don't lecture executives. Executives do not like to be lectured. And they're, in my experience, they're tired of people making these claims that you're missing the boat because you're not doing this. You should be doing customer journey mapping, which is a good thing, but everybody has a pitch. So what I decided is I'm just going to tell them interesting stuff. So, and it's usually 5 points, and the first one will be to demonstrate what goes wrong when you spend a lot of money on improvements, especially software implementation, with a functional perspective. And so I tell stories of companies that have spent 80 million, 500 million, 1 billion, even $3 billion on failed software implementations because of this versus this. And then I move on and I show them the real problem is probably the performance measures that you are setting, because they are functional in nature and are probably destructive to the process. And then I move on and I try to demonstrate that process, this is not technocratic. It's not all about technology and detailed workflow. It's also about the human, the social, the psychological, the political factors. And then I show them the differentiator. You can't be great at everything. And maybe show the role of understanding process when you are implementing new technology. And it works. You know, I didn't tell them you're stupid because you're not doing business process management. I just tell them interesting things. And the reaction is usually incredibly favorable. They're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. I think I mentioned in Daniel's interview last week, I had a case at an energy company where the president, he face palmed and he went, oh my God, now I see why none of our process improvement initiatives are ever successful. You know, and I had another case where an executive was nearly reduced to tears because he said, oh, I could see that half of the things I've done in the last 2 years have actually made the company worse.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so I have 1,000 stories like that, but you don't have that much time. I'm sure we're starting to run out of time.
So, Alec, reaching to the last question of the session, what type of traits, the new changes that you are expecting in this industry related to process management?
I think, well, I'm feeling optimistic right now. Honestly, since the pandemic, my business, at least the training business, has never been better because companies are realizing, wow, without all our people in the office together, we don't have processes that connect them and we don't have good data. So companies are getting very interested in this, but they also have no patience for big top-down multi-year initiatives. So I think that increasingly we are going to see more nimble, more agile, more iterative, more opportunistic initiatives in the process field. I don't see personally that business process management has been a huge success, but business process change, business process redesign, business process innovation, there are real successes in that area and in those areas, and I think we'll see more. I think, like I said, I'm an optimist. Because there's no, a lot of my clients have told me in recent years that I'm really their change person, and which I believe. That's why I call what I do business process change or simply organizational change. But I've been a consultant. I have been on my own for 40 years, and I have never yet seen a better way to understand how an organization functions or dysfunctions than looking at the end-to-end process. Because you get to see how people cooperate or they don't. You see how data is shared or it isn't. You see how technology integrates or it doesn't. You see how performance measures align or don't align. So it's just a really beautiful window for understanding how does the organization behave and why. So I'm an optimist.
All right. So this is a great session with an optimist mentor, optimist legend of BPM. Thank you so much, Alec. Every show gives us an opportunity to look at the BPM from a different lens. Some of the things we have already seen, experienced, but always get a new insight and give a new perspective of how to see this entire thing. Today's session has been a great learning knowledge for us. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about something I feel so strongly about, and thank you, Amit, for your very thoughtful questions. I enjoyed this and I appreciated the opportunity.
Wish you a great more success, more opportunities to you.
Yeah.
Look forward to be connected. Yeah.
Okay. I look forward to meeting in person someday. I look forward to the return of in-person work.
Thank you so much, Alec. Thank you.
Thank you for the chance.